I'm Dave Robbins, and today is December 22, year 2022, and I want to talk about two events from the past that really had a profound effect on the way I think about buffers. Okay, the first one is really epitomized beautifully in this photograph, which I'm going to pass around to the group, and I will tell you about it. Here, can you hold it?
Thank you.
It's a Darius Kinsey photograph from 1926, about 100 years ago. It shows a little gas pot donkey on a homemade sled that they were pulling themselves across this river, the Hamahama River, to get to a new site to yard with, and it was a part of my grandfather's logging operation which his operation ran from 1922 to 1932, 10 years. And it really shows, Darius Kinsey took wonderfully detailed photographs. And that picture shows how they logged in those times. They didn't care about the water quality or the steep and unstable or the fish. They were single-mindedly focused on getting the timber out. And in their minds, it was what he called a one-time extraction of a non-renewable resource. That's how he looked at it. All of them in that era looked at it that way. They could count rings back then as well as we could, and they knew that 350-year-old timber wasn't going to happen again in any realistic timeline as far as a human timeline. They logged about 12,000 acres over 10 years, and they got out 1 million board feet a week average. I'll say that again for those of you who are kind of slow with numbers. 1 million board feet a week for average for 10 years, and that was cut, yarded on a railroad, and put in the water, ended up getting rafted up to the Pope and Talbot Mill in Port Townsend, or Port Gamble. And the interesting thing that you need to also visualize from that era is that this was just one small operation. And it was an average size operation, 300 men, I don't know how many miles of track. And there was a similar operation going in every river valley on the eastern slope of the Olympics during the same 30-year period, okay? And if you took a modern fish biologist and could transport them back in time to see the amount of utter devastation from that type of logging, I think they would all tell you that fish were not going to survive this event. So the unfortunate truth for those people that need to be educated is that the fish not only survived, they thrived. I've talked to several people who lived through that era, including my dad, who was born in 1920. And so he was a boy during the logging operation, which he remembers. And he was a teenager. His teenage years were in the 30s, and he fished like crazy, like a lot of teenage boys, up and down the canyon on this same river. He said there were plenty of salmon, plenty of steelhead. And for the years and the decades following this amazing logging event, which people today can't even visualize this. Then I came along in 1951, and I was a boy in the 50s and a teenager during the 60s, and I fished just like Dad did, and I can tell you we had great steelheading. You couldn't go out in this river and not catch a steelhead. And in the fall, Dad would have us, we'd be standing in the rapids, and the fish would be literally bumping into your ankles on their way by, and you'd be holding a pitchfork, and Dad would say, not that one, not that one. See that shiny one 10 feet away heading right for you? Get that one. Anyway, we'd gather up about, we weren't greedy about it, but we would take maybe a dozen fish a year just to fill the smokehouse. And that was during the 60s. And a lot of fish. It all changed in the 70s, and I'm going to skip back to the 70s because that was the crucial decade for where we all are today. But first I want to go to the second event that colored the way I think about buffers, and that was May 18th of 1980. Kaboom! Mount St. Helens lost a cubic mile over top. A lot of it came down the Toutle River. We were all glued to our TV sets. It was a fascinating event. And about 4 or 5 months later, I'm sitting in my easy chair watching Channel 4 News at 5:30 in the evening, and they were having a recap on an update on Mount St. Helens. And here's a guy standing in the Toutle River. It's fall, low flow. He's in that deep of water, talking into the camera, and he said, look at the utter devastation. It's 200 or 300 feet. The entire riparian zone of the Tootle's wiped out. He's in silt-choked waters. And this is like burned into my memory. He's talking right into the TV camera, and he said, it's almost a direct quote, I think. He said, this river system is so wiped out, there won't be fish in this river again. Maybe not in my lifetime, maybe not ever. I came boiling out of my easy chair, and I yelled at the television set, and I scared my wife. But we'd already been married 4 years. She was kind of getting used to me. I called that man everything but smart. And I think that's when I coined the term highly educated idiot. He had all the credentials, all the right numbers and letters behind his name, and he was an idiot. And within a year, there were fish back in the Toutle. Within 5 years, all the salmon runs were back in the Toutle in force. I think that as a society, and especially as a group of tree farmers, we have utterly failed to learn the lesson of Mount St. Helens. So let me get back to the 70s. A lot of things happened in that decade. It started out with Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the Bolt decision, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and probably a lot more that I haven't thought of. And all those acts, many of them were federal acts, they led to this tidal wave of state and county regulations. So when the salmon then disappeared in the late 70s, you would think that the people in charge or the media could have pointed their finger at any number of things, or a combination of things, including too many pinnipeds eating salmon, too many gill nets catching salmon, the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, any number of things. But no, they pulled a rabbit out of their hat and said, this looks a lot like a little logger. That's it. We're going to blame the demise of the salmon on the loggers. This will be excellent. We'll get the media on our side. The public will eat it up, and it'll give us regulatory powers up to yin-yang for decades to come. And by 1978, I saw headlines in the Seattle Times. I really wished I'd saved these papers that said, salmon have gone into decline because of poor logging practices and dumb loggers. I said to my dad, I said, that's stupid. People aren't that dumb, are they? And Dad's like, I don't know, son. We'll have to wait and see. So here's the thing. I had never seen a gill net before 1974 in Hood Canal or anywhere. I didn't know what one was. And after that, we saw gill nets all up and down Hood Canal and across the mouth of every river. And I'll tell you a short story that epitomizes how that was going down. In about 1976, that was the year I married Annie, and my good buddy Danny James married my sister Elena. And he's still one of my best friends today. Their 3 children are the ones running Hama Hama Company today. So anyway, it's 1975 or 76, and we were sitting over by the big house where I grew up. And we were getting ready to go home. And somebody saw lanterns, maybe 3 or 4 lanterns bobbing up the trail on the other side of the river. And it's not easy to walk over there. It's marsh sod, and then it turns into intertidal timber, spruce and such. And we walked down to the river's edge, and they got up, and the river's only 70 feet wide there, and we were hollering across. Didn't need to talk too loud. It was a quiet summer evening. And who are you guys? What are you doing there? Well, we're going to put some nets out. And we recognized them as Skokomish Indian voices right away. They have a distinctive way of talking. Nothing against the Skokomish Indians, by the way. I've known a lot of good ones and good people. But every group of people has their boneheaded group. Anyway, these guys were going to net. And Dan and I were sitting there like, we're young bucks, we're 25 years old. Well, you can't do that. You're on private land. Oh yeah, we can do this. We're gonna net some. No, you can't. Well, my dad had already gone to bed, but the big house there, was only 60 feet from the river, and his bedroom faced the river. You'll love this story, Ken. So Dad was, if we was 25, he was 55. Okay. He had been a captain on a sub chaser in the Pacific, so he knew how to put on a commander's type voice. Well, he heard what was going on, and looked out the window. He saw these gas lanterns over there. He opened his window and he leaned out, and I won't say it as loud as he did, but he basically said, "Hey, you boys, get the heck off my land now." That's basically what he said, but a whole lot louder with a commander's voice. And all we saw was bobbing lanterns heading back to the highway. And Danny, James, and I looked at each other. Oh, that's how you do it. But that's what was happening in the 70s, in the mid-70s. The Department of Fish and Game lost complete control of the resource. It was the Wild West. Nobody kept track of the catch. And I've often said, if I'd been born an Indian, I would have been as militant as they were. I'm sure I would have. I don't really fault them for what went on. But they went crazy with their gill nets. And within 2 years, 3 years, no more salmon. This is at the tail end of your thing, because this is not politically correct, and you can edit all this out. But the other stuff the other thing I wanted to say about why I believe buffers are stupidly large now, that the Tule River proved it to us, and the logging in the 20s proved it to us. I want to add this in. I don't want to be misunderstood on this. I'm not suggesting we go back to the bad old days of rip and tear logging like we did in our ancestors' era. Not at all. Like all the other tree farmers, I'm really proud of the fact that we have such a gentler touch on the land. You can't even compare it to what happened in those days. People today, if they saw this, they'd just scream bloody murder. They would say the land and the fish will never recover. Well, it did. We're logging beautiful timber that dated from that era. They never replanted. They didn't have any long-term view of it. What happened in the 70s, when they started blaming the loggers, for 45 years we've had the most massive disinformation campaign that you can even imagine. And that's, as it's relevant to today, it speaks to the fact that you're really swimming upstream through heavy rapids, and there's a grizzly bear at the top of every rapids. The takers aren't done. The Wild Olympics is something that will never go away. The River Democracy Act in Oregon will never go away. They want to make rivers into some kind of a sentient being with rights and stuff. We're going to have to pay the rivers reparations. The idiocy is going on, and the public's all in on it. 45 years of disinformation. I think that's all I had.